caught my wife cheating on me with another man, filed for divorce, and started seeing someone new, only for my ex to stalk us and try to run us down with her car. Sounds like something out of a trashy thriller, right? Well, buckle up, Reddit, because this is my life. I've been lurking here for years, reading other people's wild stories, and now I finally have one of my own to share. It's taken me months to find the time and the sanity to sit down and write this, but I'm hoping that by sharing it, someone else might avoid the disaster I walked into. Let me introduce myself. I'm Logan, 36, and until recently, I was married to Andrea, 35, for 6 years that I'll never get back. I really thought we'd be together forever, but looking back, our relationship was a slow-motion train wreck waiting to happen. At first, though, it felt like a dream. We met on Instagram, and I genuinely thought I'd hit the jackpot. She was stunning, hilarious, and seemed like everything I'd ever wanted. Because of my messed-up childhood, I was extra cautious about red flags. My mom was, let's just say, not the ideal role model. Picture screaming matches at 3 a.m., shattered plates, and my dad silently taking it all because he didn't want to leave us. That was my blueprint for marriage, so when I started dating Andrea, I was hyper-vigilant. I watched how she treated waiters, how she handled stress, how she managed money. Everything you're supposed to look at before committing. She passed every test. Patient, kind, generous, everything my mom wasn't. I thought I'd broken the cycle. Finally found someone who wouldn't drag me through the same chaos I'd grown up with. Man, was I wrong. We had a beautiful wedding, bought a cute little house in the suburbs, and started what I thought was our happily ever after. But just 2 years in, things started going downhill fast. We went from being the couple everyone envied to having massive blowout fights on a regular schedule, like some twisted version of date night. And it was always over the dumbest things, dishes left in the sink, me working late, her spending too much time with her friends, or even which TV show to watch. I was bending over backward to keep us together, because I truly believed we could fix it. I mean, this was the woman who used to leave little love notes in my lunchbox and plan surprise weekend getaways. How do we go from that to her screaming at me because I bought the wrong brand of coffee? I'm the kind of guy who believes in fixing what's broken, not throwing it away. So, I suggested couples therapy. Scratch that, I begged for it. I found a highly recommended therapist, made all the appointments, and paid for them out of my own pocket because Andrea said, "It's your idea, so it's your expense." We went to exactly one session. One. The therapist gently pointed out some communication issues and suggested that Andrea's way of handling conflict wasn't healthy. Andrea lost her mind. She cried, said the therapist was attacking her, and refused to go back. She even called the therapist a quack and accused me of trying to make her look crazy. Later, I learned her dad had passed away shortly before our fights got worse. I try to be understanding. Grief does weird things to people. But Andrea refused to talk about it or seek help, and her anger just kept escalating. She didn't get violent or break things, but her screaming matches could wake the dead. One time, the neighbors called the cops because they thought someone was being murdered. It was just Andrea losing it over me forgetting to pick up her dry cleaning. Eventually, we settled into a routine that felt more like cohabiting than being married. We'd wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner in front of the TV, and go to bed. Rinse and repeat. The fights became less frequent, but only because we barely spoke anymore. And yet, I was still hopelessly in love with her. Pathetic, right? I clung to the memories of our early days, convinced we could get back to that if we just tried hard enough. I believed in our vows, for better or worse. But apparently, I forgot about forsaking all others. More on that soon. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. But I grew up believing that marriage is sacred, that unless someone's getting hit or cheated on, you stick it out. Well, one of those deal breakers was right around the corner, and I was completely blindsided. Here's how it all came crashing down. I work a mind-numbingly boring corporate job. Think endless meetings and pushing paperwork. It's just important enough to involve some travel, but not glamorous enough for first-class flights. One week, I was sent to a business expo in another state. 4 days of schmoozing clients and pretending to care about PowerPoint slides. On day 3, disaster struck back at the office. Something about server crashes and lost client data. Typical corporate emergency. My boss called us all back early, so I booked the first flight home. And here's where I made my first mistake. I thought I was living in a rom-com. You know those movie moments where the husband surprises his wife, and it's all magical and romantic? That's the vibe I had in my head. I spent the entire Uber ride from the airport planning the surprise. I even stopped at a fancy florist and blew $80 on Andrea's favorite flowers. These purple orchids she always said reminded her of our first date. I grabbed wine, chocolates, the whole 9 yards. I thought this grand gesture might rekindle something between us, remind her of why she fell in love with me. I got home around 2 p.m., practically buzzing with excitement. Her car was in the driveway. No surprise since she worked from home on Thursdays. But as I walked in, I noticed a few things that didn't quite add up. Her favorite playlist was blasting from upstairs, which she only did when she was in a great mood. 2 wine glasses sat in the sink, but I figured she'd had a friend over for lunch. God, I was so naive. I walked upstairs, flowers in hand, ready to surprise her. The music got louder, and I started hearing other noises. Noises my brain refused to process. You know that scene in horror movies where the audience is screaming at the character not to open the door? That was me. I turned the doorknob, stepped into my bedroom, and my world shattered. Every happy memory, every moment of trust, every I love you we'd ever shared, obliterated in a single second. There, in our bed, was the woman I'd spent 6 years loving, supporting, and building a life with. There she was, the woman I'd devoted 6 years of my life to, tangled up with some random guy in our bed. The same bed where we'd dreamed about starting a family, where I'd held her close when she cried over her father's death. She wasn't even trying to keep it quiet, just going at it, completely oblivious to the man she promised to love and honor standing right there. Like I didn't exist. Like our marriage didn't matter. The flowers I'd bought hit the floor, petals scattering across the carpet, as I stood there frozen. I watched them scramble like roaches under a flashlight, and it was humiliating. The guy, this absolute nobody, had the audacity to try and dart past me like I was some irrelevant obstacle. He fumbled with his clothes, dropping pieces everywhere, and something inside me just snapped. Maybe it was seeing him in my bed with my wife. Or maybe it was the sheer arrogance of him thinking he could casually walk away after blowing up my entire world. Before I even realized it, my hand was around his throat. I didn't squeeze, wasn't trying to choke him, but I wanted him to know he wasn't going to just stroll out of there without consequences. Then somehow I ended up slapping him. Not punching him like you'd expect, but slapping him. Twice. Open-handed, like I was channeling some overdramatic soap opera star. To this day, I don't know why I didn't just deck him. His face shifted from fear to anger, like he had the right to be upset about being caught. Can you imagine the nerve? He looked like he was gearing up for a fight in my house, after being in my bed with my wife. I'll bet anything Carolyn hadn't told him she was married. She probably spun some story about being single or separated, making me out to be the crazy ex. I let him go before it escalated further. Not because I was scared. Believe me, I wasn't, but because in that moment, I realized he wasn't worth the assault charge. He didn't make vows to me. He wasn't the one who swore to love me for better or worse. He was just another selfish idiot who couldn't keep it in his pants. The real betrayal was still in that room, standing there like she was figuring out how to spin this to her advantage. When I turned back to Carolyn, my whole body was shaking. There she was fumbling with her bra like this was just some minor inconvenience in her day. The orchids I'd bought were crushed under that guy's feet as he bolted, and she didn't even glance at them. She stood in front of the mirror, the same one I'd hung up for her last Christmas because she wanted better lighting, fixing her hair as if she hadn't just annihilated our marriage. And then she spoke. Oh, the words that came out of her mouth. "Why are you even back?" she asked, annoyed, like I'd interrupted her favorite TV show. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just irritation that I had dared to come home early. The audacity of this woman. This was our house, the one we'd bought together, and the mortgage I mostly paid. And she had the nerve to act like I was the problem here. I've never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. My hand was actually twitching, still stinging from slapping her affair partner. But I didn't move. I just stood there trying to process what I'd walked into, while she muttered under her breath, "You weren't supposed to be back." As if this was my fault. as if I'd done something wrong by not calling ahead to schedule a convenient time to catch her cheating. 6 years of marriage reduced to a minor inconvenience in her afternoon fun. And there it was, right on the nightstand, our wedding photo staring back at me. The same nightstand where I'd set the breakfast tray last weekend, trying to make her feel special. The same room where she'd been telling me she was too tired for intimacy for the past 3 months. Yet here she was full of energy for some random guy. I stood there like a fool, my mind racing. Every late night at work she'd mentioned. Every girls' night out. Every visit to her mom. Was this happening the whole time? Were there others? How many? Then Carolyn, this absolute piece of work, turned the whole thing around on me. "You weren't supposed to be back," she shrieked, her face blotchy with rage. "This is your fault. If you just told me you were coming home, you wouldn't have seen this." The mental gymnastics were breathtaking. She was actually blaming me for catching her in the act. "But wait, it gets better. I asked you for an open relationship, and you said no," she screamed, as though that justified everything. Yes, she drunkenly mentioned it 6 months ago, and I'd shut it down because I believed in monogamy. Apparently, in her twisted logic, my refusal gave her a green light to cheat. "I have needs," she kept yelling, like I was some kind of monster for expecting basic loyalty. "I try to do it without hurting you." Oh, how considerate. She tried to cheat on me nicely. Something inside me snapped. 6 years of love, trust, and dedication reduced to, "I have needs." Every kiss, every "I love you," every moment we shared, all a lie. I crossed the room in 3 steps, my hand trembling with rage, and grabbed her by the collar of the shirt I'd bought her for her birthday last month. For a moment, I thought I'd lose it. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain ripping through my chest. But then I saw the fear in her eyes, real, genuine fear, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't be that guy. My mom used to look at my dad like that, and I swore I'd never put that expression on anyone's face. I let go of her shirt and stepped back, my fists still clenched but lowered. Part of me still wishes I'd let the rage take over, just to make her feel something. Anything. But I'm glad I didn't. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I deserved better than becoming what I'd always feared. There I was, standing in the ruins of my marriage, surrounded by crushed orchids and shattered trust. And Carolyn? She had the audacity to blame me for coming home early, as if I'd interrupted her perfectly planned affair. The woman I used to kiss goodbye every morning was now blaming me for catching her cheating. As soon as I let go of her, she flipped like a switch. The fear vanished, replaced by cold indifference. Now, suddenly, she was the victim. "You were going to hit me? Really?" She shrieked in my back as I walked out of the room. "This is why I don't love you anymore. You're not even a real man." Her voice followed me down the hallway, spewing every insult she could think of. 6 years of marriage, and now she was trying to paint me as the bad guy in her little story. The same woman who had just been trembling with fear a minute ago was now shouting like she had the moral high ground. It wasn't until I talked to my buddy Mark later that night that it clicked. She wanted me to hit her. Can you believe that? She wanted me to snap, to give her a reason to turn this whole mess around. It was all part of her twisted plan, to transform herself from the cheating wife into the poor, abused spouse. She'd run to the cops with a bruise on her face, spin a sob story, and walk away with half my stuff and a steady alimony check every month. The manipulation was almost impressive in its depravity. I had to get out of that house. The entire place reeked of betrayal. Literally. Their perfume and cologne clung to the bedroom, the sheets, the air. The same bed where I'd held her through anxiety attacks was now tainted with the scent of another man. I grabbed my wallet and keys and just drove, ending up at Mark's place. Thank God for Mark. One look at my face, and he broke out the whiskey. He'd been through a divorce before, so he laid it out straight. I needed to lawyer up immediately. But here was the kicker. Because I made 6 figures while Carolyn worked part-time at a boutique. Let's be honest, she was playing pretend at having a career. I was looking at the possibility of paying her alimony. That's right. In my state, the cheater can still walk away with a monthly paycheck from the person they betrayed. But Mark, the brilliant bastard, pointed out something that gave me hope. If I could prove infidelity, it might impact the alimony calculations. "Document everything," he told me. Every text, every email, every receipt. Anything that shows she was stepping out on you. For the first time all day, I felt like I had a sliver of control in this dumpster fire of a situation. Maybe I wouldn't have to bankroll her and her boyfriend's date nights after all. While I was sitting in Mark's living room, trying to keep the whiskey from coming back up, my phone started buzzing. Carolyn, realizing she couldn't manipulate me face-to-face, had decided to try her hand at text warfare. And wow, the stuff she sent me, you wouldn't believe it. This was the same woman who, just last week, was sending me heart emojis and I love you messages. Now, she was sending me a full novel comparing me to her affair partner, in graphic detail. She went all in, describing how he was better in bed, how he could satisfy her in ways I never could, and how she'd been faking it with me for years. She even included size comparisons, as if this was some twisted Yelp review for my performance. And then, the piece de resistance. She had the audacity to tell me her affair partner had ruined her for other men. Like I was supposed to want her back after hearing that. But the cherry on top? She was furious with me for interrupting her little love fest. She called me selfish for coming home unannounced and accused me of ruining her chance at real happiness. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. Thank God for Mark. He immediately told me to screenshot everything. Document, 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 he repeated like a mantra. And it's a good thing I did because, not even a minute later, I watched as those little message bubbles started disappearing one by one. Guess she realized confessing to adultery in writing wasn't the smartest move when she was about to go head-to-head with her higher-earning husband in divorce court. But it was too late. The damage was done. She might have deleted the texts, but I had screenshots of every last word, safely saved to my phone, ready to show a judge exactly why she didn't deserve a dime of my money. Mark was a goldmine of divorce advice that night. Between shots of whiskey, he walked me through everything, securing my bank accounts, locking down evidence, and finding the right lawyer. I barely slept, replaying everything over and over while scrolling through attorney reviews on my phone. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of consultations. Some lawyers wanted retainers that cost more than my car, while others seemed like they just barely passed the bar. Eventually, I found Lucas, a guy who actually seemed to care about my case without requiring me to sell a kidney to afford him. When I showed him the screenshots of Carolyn's text meltdown and photos of the disaster I'd walked in on, he actually smiled. "We've got a solid case to minimize or even eliminate alimony," he said. But he was realistic too. "Judges in this state tend to favor the lower-earning spouse," he warned, regardless of why the marriage ended. Still, knowing I had someone in my corner who understood what he was doing felt like a lifeline. Then came the most satisfying moment of all, serving Carolyn with divorce papers. And of course, she made it as difficult as possible. For 3 weeks, she dodged the process server. She changed her schedule, pretended not to be home, and even had her mom claim she'd moved to Florida. The server finally caught her coming out of a yoga class, probably the only workout she'd done in months. Even then, she milked every second of the 30 days she had to respond, purely out of spite. And when the proceedings started, she transformed into the queen of petty. She forgot to bring required documents, showed up late to every appointment, and conveniently lost bank statements. Her lawyer kept sending over ridiculous settlement proposals. She wanted the house, my 401k, and alimony. All this from a woman I caught cheating in our bed. The worst part? She was still seeing her affair partner, living her best life while dragging out the divorce and draining my bank account with endless legal fees. Every time we got close to an agreement, she'd change her mind or tack on new demands, like she was deriving some sick pleasure from watching me waste money on attorney bills. I could practically hear her laughing from her boyfriend's bedroom. Meanwhile, I was doing my best to move on, or at least distract myself. I even tried getting back into the dating scene, though that didn't exactly go as planned. I went through a phase, trying to move on by diving into the world of dating apps. Tinder, Bumble, you name it, I downloaded them all. I had a few one-night stands, convincing myself this was what moving on looked like. But each morning after felt emptier than the last. Every meaningless hookup was a stark reminder of why I'd said no when Carolyn suggested an open relationship. That lifestyle just wasn't for me. I wasn't the guy chasing casual flings. I wanted to wake up next to someone I loved, someone who knew all my quirks, who could share inside jokes and build a life with me. Eventually, I realized I needed a better distraction. Work, divorce papers, and disappointing hookups weren't cutting it. Before Carolyn and all the chaos of our marriage, I used to be an avid reader, the kind of guy who'd stay up all night to finish a book. So, one Saturday, instead of swiping through apps or obsessing over emails from my lawyer, I visited a little indie bookstore downtown. You know the type: creaky wooden floors, that intoxicating old book smell, and a couple of cats snoozing in the window. I wandered into the sci-fi section and immediately felt lost. Apparently, the genre had evolved a lot while I was busy trying to salvage my marriage. Thick tomes with titles I couldn't pronounce and sprawling series that seemed to go on forever stared back at me. I must have looked completely out of my depth because the woman next to me let out a soft laugh, not mocking, just amused. She was holding a massive book that could have doubled as a weapon. When I turned to look, she smiled and asked if I needed help. I told her I was trying to find a good sci-fi read, but had no idea where to start. The next thing I knew, we were sitting in these cozy chairs in the corner, and she was giving me a crash course on modern science fiction. Her enthusiasm was contagious. Her eyes lit up as she talked about her favorite books, and she had this endearing habit of tucking her hair behind her ear whenever she got excited. What started as a quick recommendation turned into a 2-hour conversation. We talked about everything from classic Asimov to contemporary space operas. She raved about a series involving parallel universes, and I shared stories about my old college favorites. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Carolyn, divorce lawyers, or the disaster my life had become. I was just a guy talking books with a beautiful, kind woman who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. When our impromptu book club session ended, I worked up the nerve to ask for her number. My hands were actually shaking as I put it in my phone. Pretty pathetic for a 36-year-old man, but something about her made me feel like a nervous teenager again. I left the bookstore with her number, a recommendation for the three-body problem, and my first genuine smile in months. Her name was Emma, and she was unlike anyone I'd ever met. That night, I reread our brief text exchange a dozen times, marveling at how different it felt from the hollow Tinder conversations I'd had before. There was something real here, something worth exploring. On our first date, I knew I had to tell her about my ongoing divorce. I'd rehearsed the conversation in my head, expecting her to run for the hills when I mentioned my psycho, soon-to-be ex-wife. But Emma, she just sipped her wine and said, "I appreciate your honesty. We all have baggage, and at least you're dealing with yours. No judgment. No silences." She even joked that dating a guy going through a divorce meant she'd never have to worry if I was secretly married. Emma was the polar opposite of Carolyn in every way. Where Carolyn would scream during arguments, Emma would calmly talk things through. Where Carolyn demanded attention, Emma gave it freely and genuinely. She listened to me, remembered little details I'd mentioned weeks earlier, and never made me feel ashamed of my situation. For the first time in years, I felt seen and heard. And the best part? I wasn't even looking for her. No dating apps, no setups, just two people connecting over science fiction in a bookstore. You couldn't script it better. 5 months into dating Emma, I was falling hard. Everything about her felt right. The way she'd send me book recommendations during work, the little notes she'd leave in the books she lent me, the way she'd listen intently when I talked about my day. But Carolyn was still dragging out the divorce, finding new ways to delay the process every time we got close to finalizing it. Missing signatures, disputed assets, mysteriously remembered joint accounts. You name it, she tried it. Emma was a rock through it all. She never pressured me about the divorce or complained about being with a technically married man. She'd just hold my hand during frustrating calls with my lawyer and remind me that this nightmare would eventually end. For the first time in a long while, I was genuinely happy. Of course, that's when everything went completely off the rails. Emma and I had just spent a perfect Saturday together. Lunch at a cute cafe, a little shopping, and we were heading back to her car in the mall parking lot. The sun was setting, and we were laughing about something silly when the sound hit me first. An engine revving like someone had floored the gas pedal. I turned toward the noise, just in time to see a car barreling straight at us, but mainly aiming for Emma. Instinct took over, and I grabbed her arm. yanking her out of the way. I wasn't fast enough. The car clipped her leg, and the sickening sound of her bones snapping, combined with her scream, is something I'll never forget. She collapsed onto the pavement, and I fell with her, trying to shield her with my body. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone to call 911, but before I could even dial, the sound of screeching tires came again. The car had hit another vehicle, backed up, and was now revving for another attempt. This wasn't an accident. Emma was sobbing in agony, her leg bent at a horrifying angle. I knew if I didn't move her, we'd both be dead. I dragged her between two parked cars, her cries of pain stabbing at my heart, but I couldn't stop. The car charged forward again, smashing into the vehicles we'd been hiding behind. Alarms blared. People screamed. Chaos erupted in the parking lot. Then the driver's door opened, and time seemed to freeze. Carolyn stepped out like she was arriving at a dinner party, calm and put together, except for the wild look in her eyes. She was wearing the same jacket she used to wear to work, her hair perfectly done. The disconnect between her polished appearance and what she'd just done was terrifying. This wasn't road rage. This wasn't a drunk driver. This was my soon-to-be ex-wife who had been stalking us, deciding that if she couldn't have me, no one could. And she hadn't just tried to kill me. She had deliberately aimed for Emma. Holding Emma close, her whimpers of pain breaking my heart, I realized the horrifying truth. Carolyn had turned into something else entirely. This wasn't the woman I'd been married to for 6 years, or even the one I'd caught cheating. This was something darker, a monster wearing her face. She had planned this. She'd followed us, waited for the perfect moment, and deliberately tried to. As Carolyn started walking toward us, her heels clicking on the pavement like some twisted countdown, I honestly thought she was coming to finish what the car hadn't. Her face was eerily blank, but her eyes burned with a hatred I'd never seen before, not even in our worst fights. Thank God for the bystander built like a linebacker who stepped in. He grabbed her before she could reach us, but even then, she thrashed and fought like a rabid animal, trying to break free. I was kneeling next to Emma, trying to keep her calm and assess her injuries, but I couldn't take my eyes off Carolyn. This was the woman I'd shared 6 years of my life with, the woman I'd eaten dinner with, slept next to, and talked about having kids with. And here she was, having just tried to kill me and my girlfriend in broad daylight. The disconnect between the Carolyn I'd married and the one standing in front of me was impossible to process. How do you reconcile the fact that someone you once loved deeply just tried to murder you? Sirens blared as the police and ambulance arrived. Emma was in so much pain, but she still managed to give me a weak smile, as if to say, "I'll be okay." Meanwhile, Carolyn completely lost what little was left of her mind. As the officers cuffed her, she started screaming at the top of her lungs. "It hasn't even been a year, and you're already parading around with that whore." The venom in her voice was enough to make everyone around us take a step back. She'd just attempted murder in front of dozens of witnesses, and yet somehow, in her twisted mind, she was the victim. The sheer insanity of it all hit me like a freight train. This was the same woman who had cheated on me in our bed, blamed me for catching her, and dragged out our divorce just to be spiteful. And now, she was screaming about betrayal after trying to kill me and Emma. Her mental gymnastics were nothing short of Olympic level. Standing there in the chaotic parking lot, with Carolyn being stuffed into the back of a police car and Emma's blood on my hands from trying to help her, I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate reality. The woman who used to make me pancakes on Sundays and send me cute texts during work had just tried to commit cold-blooded murder. And the craziest part? She genuinely believed she was justified. I visited Emma in the hospital every day. Each time, I braced myself for the inevitable breakup conversation. Who could blame her if she decided she didn't want to stick around after all this? 5 months into dating, and my psychotic soon-to-be ex-wife had tried to turn her into a hood ornament. That's not the kind of baggage most people sign up for. Her leg was in a massive cast, and she was facing months of grueling physical therapy, all because she had the misfortune of dating me. When I finally worked up the courage to tell her who the driver was, I couldn't even look her in the eye. I just stared at the hospital floor, waiting for her to tell me she couldn't do this anymore. Instead, Emma reached for my hand and, with a faint smile, said, "Well, At least we know she'll have plenty of time to work on her road rage in prison. She actually made a joke. This incredible woman, lying in a hospital bed with pins in her leg because my ex-wife had tried to kill her, was trying to make me feel better. When I hesitantly asked if she was sure she wanted to stay with me after all this, she looked at me like I'd lost my mind. What? You think I'm going to let her win? She's going to prison, and I'm going to walk again just fine. I'd say I'm coming out ahead in this one. The district attorney's office was all over Carolyn's case. Turns out, multiple security cameras had caught the whole thing in crystal clear HD. The footage was like something out of a horror movie. You could see Carolyn circling the parking lot in her car like a shark, watching us. The DA said this was crucial because it proved premeditation. She didn't just snap. She stalked us, waited for the right moment, and deliberately tried to kill Emma. The most chilling part of the footage? Before she gunned the car toward us, Carolyn casually checked her makeup in the rearview mirror. She wasn't some unhinged woman in a fit of rage. She was calm, calculated, and fully aware of what she was doing. The trial was a masterclass in how to send someone to prison. The prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence. 6 different camera angles, witness testimonies from people who had been in the parking lot, and even footage of Carolyn's failed second attempt after Emma was already on the ground. Emma testified with grace and courage, even with her legs still in a cast. I had to testify too, recounting everything, from the day I caught Carolyn cheating to the threatening texts and the terrifying events of that day. Carolyn sat there throughout the trial, dabbing her eyes with tissues and trying to look remorseful. The jury didn't buy it for a second. They came back with a guilty verdict on all counts: attempted murder, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and more. When sentencing day came, the judge handed her 12 years in prison. 12 years. That was it. She could even get out earlier with good behavior. I sat there in disbelief. This woman had planned and executed a calculated attempt to kill 2 people, and she might be out in less than a decade. The judge bought into her remorse, despite the video evidence of her checking her lipstick before trying to kill us. After the criminal trial, the divorce proceedings became a breeze. Carolyn had to attend via video link from prison, looking stunning in her orange jumpsuit. Her lawyer tried to argue for alimony and a share of my assets, but the judge shut it all down. The court isn't in the business of rewarding attempted murderers, he said. Carolyn left the marriage with exactly what she brought into it: her clothes, her personal items, and a commissary account. Emma and I moved into a new place downtown, far from the apartment haunted by memories of my cheating ex. She's fully recovered now. You'd never guess she'd been through such a traumatic ordeal. And her dark humor hasn't changed. Totally worth it, she jokes about the incident. Got rid of your crazy ex for good. We're talking about getting married next spring. It feels fitting, given that we met over sci-fi books, and now we're living our own wild story, with a happy ending. Sure, Carolyn will eventually get out of prison, but that's what restraining orders and concealed carry permits are for. Emma's dad, a gun instructor, made sure we were prepared for anything. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's to document everything and trust your instincts. Sometimes crazy doesn't wave a red flag. It hides behind a smile and an "I love you." Thanks for sticking with me through this insane story, Reddit. Emma's favorite car pun? Guess your ex really drove the relationship into the ground. And yes, we still shop at that bookstore. No, we don't park at that mall anymore.